and I got really interested about the World Cup, logistics, and security. That's the angle that we have for today's episode because Guadalajara is also the home of the Cartel Jalisco New Generation.
The minute Mexico was awarded the World Cup, we knew Guadalajara was going to be picked because even before, during the bidding process, we knew the stadiums. There's not that many stadiums in Mexico that are in a World Cup quality and size, and Estadio Akron is one of them. It's no longer about just putting a gun in your face. It's about having the oversight of a logistical network and identifying over a dozen ways of monetizing that. And it's not that the violence is going to drop during the World Cup, it's just going to be invisible. Sport generally is a very underreported area for organized crime. The World Cup, I hope, will be a change for that, because I think the World Cup has woken everybody up to the criminal risks that are present in every similar international event. I found a website called the Sports and Crime Briefing 2 years ago to investigate the way in which originally cartels.
Before we continue, I want to ask you a huge favor. Please subscribe. The reason for it is because the algorithm will show you the most interesting and rich conversations. You will be notified when we post a new episode. And obviously, you will help us attract new guests, have richer conversations, grow our audience. So I thank you for listening to us and welcome to LatAm Unboxed. Okay, so we're just days away from the World Cup, and Guadalajara is one of the host cities in Mexico. More than 50,000 people will pour into Guadalajara's Akron Stadium. And I know this because Colombia will be playing one of the matches in Mexico, in Guadalajara. And I got really interested about the World Cup, logistics, and security. That's the angle that we have for today's episode because Guadalajara is also the home of the Cartel Jalisco New Generation, the most powerful cartel in Mexico. And while FIFA is securing the stadium and it's securing the fans, nobody is talking about the supply chain and the logistics risks that the World Cup brings into the table in Mexico. So that's why I decided to invite my good friend and colleague, Chris Dalby. He's a journalist, policy analyst, and an author who has spent over a decade inside the world of organized crime in Latin America. He also wrote the book of Cartel Jalisco New Generation. And he has reported from 20 different countries. And today, he's a senior analyst in Dyami Security Intelligence. Welcome, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Diego. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. So today the conversation is really interesting because we're going to talk about what the World Cup really means for logistics and security in Mexico, risks that nobody is briefing you on, and that's the reason why we have these type of conversations in LatAm Unboxed. So the first question that I have for you is a personal question because I was really interested on this aspect, Chris. You spent over a decade going deeper and deeper into the world of organized crime in Mexico. And the reality is that most people run away from that world. What made you run toward?
Let me take you back to when I was a foreign correspondent. And there were sort of two global threats that your average foreign correspondent has to report. One is climate change, and one is organized crime. Obviously, climate change is a catastrophic threat to humanity, but the journalists who cover that professionally for a generation have increasingly been experts in climate change, with master's degrees in environmental science and ecology, and organized crime didn't seem to get the same amount of attention. Yes, you would get the big headlines when a big narco was killed or there was a big cocaine seizure. The mechanisms, the systems, the way in which organized crime embeds itself into a society, whether that's in a community, whether that's in a border, whether that's in a supply chain. I always wanted to know more. Luckily, I started working with a company called Insight Crime, which does amazing work covering organized crime in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then after I left Insight Crime and moved to Europe, I founded World of Crime. Now, World of Crime was always about trying to forecast where organized crime was going next. And one of the big areas which we identified was sport. Sport generally is a very underreported area for organized crime. The World Cup, I hope, will be a change for that, because I think the World Cup has woken everybody up to the criminal risks that are present in every similar international event. I found a website called the Sports and Crime Briefing 2 years ago to investigate the way in which originally cartels Brazilian gangs were taking over the football industry. And that's led me to where I am today, where we're advising companies that are either supplying the World Cup directly or are going to be very active in Mexico during that time on what risks, what criminal risks they're exposing themselves to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And when we think about the security risks, one number comes to my mind, and it's the following. And I think we should ponder upon this number. More than 80% of cargo thefts in Mexico now involve violence, and it has increased steadily over the years. So, what does that look like on the ground? Not statistically, considering the number, but physically on a highway at 2 a.m. in Mexico.
I want to just take a second with that number, 82%. So 82%, that was a annual cargo theft report from the private sector. If you ask the Mexican government, they'll tell you that cargo theft is down 21% in 2025. Both things can be true. The volume of cargo thefts might be down, but the severity is up. What we're looking at is an increasingly professionalized industry within the cartel, within organized crime, that understands very well what they're looking for, that are targeting specific trucks, specific cargo, looking at specific companies on specific routes at specific times. Planning that a cargo company can put in place, that a logistics provider can put in place, is already usually owned or accessed by the cartel. This is not a smash and grab operation. It's not a bunch of yahoos hiding in a pickup truck on the edge of a Mexican highway and just hijacking whatever comes past. They are hyper specific and hyper specialized. They might be working with the driver. They might have cloned the information to get access to the truck. The cargo might have been contaminated inside the port for a specific pickup. So it's very difficult to defend against all that when the endpoints can happen at any point in the supply chain. Why? For two very simple reasons. One, money talks, right? Whatever you're paying a cargo driver, whatever you're paying a customs broker, whatever you're paying a dock worker, cartels can bribe them. Everybody's got a price. And secondly, the violence. The violence, 82% is a bit of a not misleading statistic. Violence can be just, a gun to someone's head and say, hey, step out of the truck, right? It can also go all the way to murder. There were 50 trucker murders reported in 2025 in Mexico. I think that number's soft. I think that number's probably well over 100. There are a number of incidents that are not recorded, a number of incidents where local police or local state reported as a traffic accident. So there is a high degree of risk to truck drivers. But the rest of the thing is that a lot of this violence is a masquerade. We see a lot of violence being done to provide cover for the driver, right? And it's not to make your audience panic and think, oh, my truck drivers are all cartel members, not at all. But it does happen where they will pretend to beat up a driver or hit him one time just so he can then have the pedestal and says, oh, I was the victim. Continue driving and continue being a good source of information, of cargo, of access for the criminal group in question.
When I think about the following, is okay, Guadalajara is one of the host cities in the World Cup. And I'm really curious to hear from you. What was your first thought when you saw that Guadalajara was on the list for the World Cup? What was your first idea when you start considering the security risks and everything that is related to the Cartel Jalisco New Generation?
The minute Mexico was awarded the World Cup, we knew Guadalajara was going to be picked because long before, during the bidding process, we knew the stadiums. There's not that many stadiums in Mexico that are at a World Cup quality and size, and Estadio Akron is one of the few. There are two realities here. One is that the World Cup will allow the cartels to make billions of dollars, but not necessarily in new ways. The World Cup will provide them with the sort of turbocharging of the criminal economies that they've put in place in Guadalajara, Zapopan, in the rest of Jalisco, on Mexico's Pacific coast for well over a decade. You're seeing a Cartel de Jalisco as an example, but others in Mexico, moving from being just a drug trafficking organization to being criminal governance, right? Where they own import-export companies, they own the hotels, they own the restaurants, they own the bars, they own the trucking companies, they have people inside the port feeding them customs data, they have drivers working for them, they control the fishermen that are selling the seafood that is going to be sold inside the stadium, right? They know how much money each food and beverage provider is making so they can extort them at a very precise rate. There is a level of economic oversight now for a cartel of that size that is very difficult to fight back. And they didn't do that for the World Cup. They did that because they were able to, right? Now, most politicians in municipalities in Mexico that are under cartel control, it's not that they're working for the cartel. It's that if they don't collaborate, they'll be shot. So they're sharing tax information. They're sharing revenue information on every company, on every productive economy inside a town. Now, when you have that for the World Cup, that's an incredible piece of intelligence. What you're going to see during the World Cup is peace. I would be very surprised if there is a spike in violence or a spike in cargo theft during the World Cup. Part of it is because, of course, Mexico has deployed almost 100,000 security forces to secure these areas. But the second thing is violence is bad for business during the World Cup. You don't want the tourists to stay away. You don't want extra security. You want the tourists to feel we're going to go to the bar, we're going to go to the taqueria, we're going to go to the nice beach hotels in Puerto Vallarta and Cabo San Lucas before or after the World Cup, because that allows the cartels to make all that much more money from extorting the hotels, the bars, and the restaurants, from selling drugs, from all the points of entry. They want that maximized for longer because the World Cup is a unique economic windfall for a cartel. Let me just go back on one thing you said. You were expecting a more dire prognosis. I would say it's pretty dire because what does it say about a country? Yes, I don't think you're going to see decapitated heads on the side of the road in front of Estadio Akron. But what you are essentially seeing is a country that on the facade is presenting a secure front because there are armed police outside the stadium. But on the second front, from a supply chain and logistics perspective, you have a country that is utterly unable to fight back against cartel infiltration of port, customs, taxation, local and regional municipalities, king companies, food and beverage industries, controlling suppliers. I guarantee you that there are suppliers inside the World Cup supply chain in Mexico that are friends with the cartel. I absolutely guarantee you that. That for me is pretty dire because it's a different level of cartel control where it's no longer about just putting a gun in your face. It's about having the oversight of a logistical network and identifying over a dozen ways of monetizing that. And it's not that the violence is going to drop during the World Cup, it's just going to be invisible. There were murders in Cancun, in Playa del Carmen, in Puerto Vallarta every single week. They're not happening in front of the hotels. They're happening a few blocks back. And that pattern is going to continue.
Okay. So that brings me to a really interesting question because you showed us both angles. Now, if every logistics CEO operating in Mexico woke up tomorrow and listened to this episode, what's the one thing that you want them to actually do differently?
I mean, I would say it's a bit late now for the World Cup, but significantly expand your due diligence. We are seeing this growing as a practice, but it's not growing fast enough. The background checks that have to be done in Mexico generally, but even more around the World Cup, have to go much, much, much deeper. Not only who's the partner, what's the beneficial ownership, what's the reason for any changes in ownership, who are they doing business with, what's your sanctions exposure, not just from your direct partners, but from their trading partners. When you outsource to 3PL, make sure that 3PL company is investing a lot of money in security at pickup, biometric checks at pickup, not just we hire someone because they had a clean judicial record 2 years ago. Really going the extra step to ensure that you as a company are as protected as you can possibly be. It's not possible to be completely connected. Simply, there is too much cartel control in and around Jalisco, but it's the same in Monterrey. It's the same in Mexico City, perhaps in slightly different ways. But in Jalisco, it is, for me, impossible to be completely proof to cartel exposure during the World Cup. In the logistics and supply chain and trucking industries, there's just too many fronts. But you can at least go the extra mile to ensure that you have done as much as you can to prevent that exposure.
Definitely, Chris. Thank you so much for your comments, and I hope to see you in probably 2 months or 3 months to just dissect what happened in Mexico. I think it would be really cool to see what actually happened based on the results of the World Cup. So, last comment. Who are you rooting for in the World Cup?
Well, I'm British and French, but my love in football is French. My wife is Portuguese, so our house is France and Portugal. My son was born in Mexico, so our third team is Mexico. We're diversifying our options.
Yeah, hopefully, I see that you have really good chances of celebrating in July because you're rooting
Yeah.
for really strong teams: France, Portugal, England,
Some of your
Mexico.
audience
So,
right now are rolling their eyes, going, "No, no, no, no! You're not allowed to hedge your bets that widely."
yeah, you're hedging your bets a lot, but let's talk in 2 months. I really appreciate your time, Chris.
Perfect. Thank you.